Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ignorant Intellectual on Media. Today, I thought I'd do another thrift store haul. I've been around for the last week or so, picking up books and videos and CDs, and I thought I'd go through it with you pretty quickly. It includes, let's see here, one, two, three, four books, a trilogy of books, and a box set, and three CDs, and one, two, three, four, nine uh, DVDs, a Steelbook Blu-ray, and a four movie pack DVD set. All right, so let's do the books first, get those done first, and then we'll move on to the movies and then finally the CDs. Okay, so first up is Dante's three-volume set of the Divine Comedy. All right, which is basically um, Dante's. Basically, it's a very long poem. Okay, written kind of, well, it's written in Italian or Old Italian. This is Middle Ages stuff, right? So this is around the 12th century, 11th, 12th century that he wrote this. It's basically a very long poem. It's probably the greatest piece of literature or poetry ever written in Italy. All right, and everybody refers to it as one of the great poets of all time, right? One of the great. Basically, it's Dante going through hell and heaven and purgatory um, with Virgil, the old author of the Aeneid. Aeneid. I always have difficulty with that word, ignorant intellectual. Anyway, so it's one of the more famous Italian works, and probably it's the country's greatest contribution to world literature, right? And this is the Penguin Classic version of it. Penguin's Classics, all right. It's got the black spine, you know. It's not the latest version, but it's the second latest version of it. So it came in three volumes. This one and this one seem to be of the same time, but then this one's a little bit larger. And instead of having volume three in a number, it's actually in Roman numerals, right? So it was probably part of a different set of issues of the Divine Comedy. But it's all three of them together in one. And basically, the first volume, which is called Hell, is where Virgil takes Dante through all the different levels of hell. And then the second one is Purgatory, where Dante goes through Purgatory, and the third is Paradise, where he goes through heaven. So it's basically Dante's imagination on what hell and heaven and purgatory look like, and it's one of the greatest pieces of literature in world history. All right, so that's Dante's The Divine Comedy. Next up are two books by Khalil Gibran. This is his more famous book. All right, it's called The Prophet. I wrote the date down because I always forget when the publishing is. 1923. So this came out in 1923. It's his most famous book. Um, this was published in the 1940s, but I'm not sure exactly when he wrote it. Um, Spirits Rebellious. It's basically his complaints of Lebanese society when they were dominated by the Turks. Um, back in the early 20th century, if I remember correctly. And this is basically his idea. The prophet is basically him, and he basically writes about what the proper conduct is in different areas of society or whatever, right? So basically, he's whatever the name of the protagonist is in a city, and he's going back to his hometown or whatever by boat, and while he's walking towards the boat, the city comes out and greets him and says goodbye to him, but asks him what his thoughts are on a bunch of different subjects. And basically, each little chapter is a small piece of poetry that's supposed to enlighten you, right? So, like on love, on marriage, on children, on giving, on eating and drinking, on work, on joy and sorrow, on houses, so on and so forth, on self knowledge, on pain, on freedom. Anyways, so it talks about, I think there's 26 different subjects on death, on religion, on beauty, all right, so on and so forth. And basically, this has been published in what, like 100 languages, from my understanding, and it's been read by millions and millions of people. It's considered one of the greatest, you know, Lebanese American books of all time, and everybody reads it and gets enlightened and goes, "Wow!" You know what I mean? All right, so I read it. I was not super impressed by it, but I don't know. It's nothing really mind blowing. You know what I mean? It's common sense, a lot of it, and he seems to, you know, Gibran seems to want to put himself off in this book as some sort of mystic or whatever. You know what I mean? Anyways, you may enjoy it. I didn't really enjoy it a lot, but it's considered one of the great books of all time. All right, and this is another one of his books. Now, this one seems a bit more interesting. It's basically, when first published in the original Arabic, the book created a sensation. It was burned publicly in the marketplace in Beirut by furious officials of church and state who denounced it as a poisonous and dangerous to the peace and well-being of the country. Gibran himself was exiled because of this book. This was at a time when Lebanon was in virtual slavery to oppressive Turkish rule. Years later, Gibran's exile was remanded, and the church embraced him, though without reconciliation on his part. Yet the record remains, as Gibran wrote it here, his profound felt anger and indignant protest at the vicious inequality of man and woman in marriage, the wretched failure of the principles of law and justice, and the corrupt, thieving practices of religious administration in the Near East of his time. So it's basically a big bitch fest, right? On what's wrong with Lebanon and the area, and he got exiled for it. All right. So I really like bitch fests. They're quite enjoyable to read, so I'll probably enjoy that more than The Prophet. I haven't read it yet. All right. Next up is a series of novels that were written by C.S. Lewis. All right, and basically many of them were, made into films. All right, and it's the Chronicles of Narnia. In fact, this version of it, this box set, looks like, um, has all seven of the volumes. All right, and basically they put them in order of one to seven, not at the time they were published, but at the time that the books takes place. So uh, you first hear, or the creation of Narnia, that fantasy world, is created in The Magician's Nephew, but this is like the sixth novel published wise that was published. All right, um, and then you see the death of Narnia in The Last Battle. All right, which is the seventh one, and that was the last volume. But the first volume was not The Magician's Nephew. The first volume, actually, well, publishing wise, was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. That's why that is the most popular out of all seven of the books. Most people, when they decide that they're going to read this, they'll read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe first, and then they see if they like it. They'll continue reading the other ones. But basically, I found this box set at a thrift store, and I got it for $5, right? So um, I may read it before I sell it, but I'm going to resell it. And basically, new this was $60 Canadian, so I'll probably see if I can sell it for about 20. So I pick it up for 5 and sell it for 20. That'll give me some money to buy some more films or other stuff, right? All right, so that's the Chronicles of Narnia. If you haven't read it, it's probably C.S. Lewis' most famous non, well, there's Christian influences in the books because C.S. Lewis was a devout Christian, and he wrote a lot of really good books on Christianity. In fact, his most famous book is called On Christianity, and many Christians have read that. And if you're interested in Christian literature, understanding the religion, On Christianity would be a good book to read, whether you're a believer or not, right? So anyway, so that's C.S. Lewis's fantasy series of 7 volumes called The Chronicles of Narnia. Next up is Edgar Allan Poe's Tales of Mystery and Imagination. And this is basically a compilation of all his short stories that have to do with, you know, tales of mystery and imagination. He wrote other stuff, but they basically compiled all of his things that you would consider, mysterious or whatever of his of his works, right? So, and they put it out in a nice hardcover. Of course, this hasn't been protected much, and the paper stock wasn't all that great, so you can see the yellowing or the browning of the paper. It's been on somebody's shelf for for years, right? When was this published? 1987. So this is 87, 97, 2007, 2000, like over 40 years old, and it's not, a. You can tell it was made pretty cheaply, but it's still intact, so it's good. So I'll probably sell this for a few bucks as well. I found it for $4. So, all right. Next up is one of Charles Dickens's great novels, and that is Nicholas Nickleby. All right, and this was published back in 1838, 1839. It was actually a serial originally, and then they put all the all the serial, meaning that it was published like in chapters or in parts, and published in a pamphlet or in a newspaper or whatever, and then they brought all the pieces together and put it together and made this volume. Now this is part of the uh, International Collectors Library, so these volumes sell really well, especially if they're in good condition. They're hard to keep in good condition because they're the making of them was not all that great, right? The actual glue that's here comes off. They're thin faux leather, right? So if you notice here, these stick up above the pages, and so when you place it on a shelf, you end up damaging that part of the book, and it cracks and it goes up the spine, right? So they're hard to keep in really good condition, but this one is in not bad condition, and I'll probably end up selling it. All right, so those are all the books. All right, so oh, and the story is basically about a boy, or I think he's a teenager, named Nicholas, whose father dies, and then he's responsible for his mother and his younger sister, and he ends up going out to find work, and ends up into a whole bunch of crap, and it shows what Charles Dickens thought, or what existed, back in the 19th century. If you didn't have money, or relatives that had money, and you ended up having some sort of problem in the family that caused the breadwinner of the family to die, you're pretty much destitute and on the street. You know what I mean? So um, it goes through a lot of that stuff. So it's an interesting read. It's a bit depressing, but most of Dickens' stuff ends up becoming successful at the end, right? So, all right. So next up is uh, George A. Romero's second zombie film on DVD, Dawn of the Dead. This is a nice addition. The problem is that when I picked it up, I didn't look at it, and it's actually a Region 2 DVD, right? So, sorry, oh, it says Region 1 on it. So then it should, but I tried to play it in my Blu-ray player upstairs, and it wouldn't play. So, um, anyways, it's his second film. This is the one that takes place at the shopping mall, if I remember correctly. But they did a remake of it starring Sarah Polley back in 2000, and that one is extremely good. So I actually like it better than the Romero film, which is a bit surprising, and maybe people will yell at me for saying that. But the remake of it in 2000, I found more enjoyable than this one. So, but anyway, so Dawn of the Dead, that's the second one after Night of the Living Dead. All right. And here's a 4-pack of Turner Classic Films. All right. Um, this one is Best Picture winners. All right. It has Gigi, um, Casablanca, An American in Paris, and Miss Minerva. Now, I watched all four of these films. Casablanca, obviously one of the greatest films of all time. All right. Um, Gigi was quite enjoyable. I watched about 3/4 of it, and then the disc skipped and it wouldn't play any further. So I'm gonna have to find another copy of that and finish watching it. It's basically Gigi. Gigi's mother is in her bedroom for the whole film, so she's not being taken care of by her mother. She's like, Gigi is like I don't know how old, 13, 14, 15, something like that, and she's being taught by her grandmother and her aunt, her great aunt, I think it is. Anyways, them two are raising her to become what do they call it? Um, I can't remember the name of it. Basically, it's almost like a high class prostitute where you're trained to please a man, right? Um, what kind of cigars to get for him, what to make him uh, in food, how to behave around him, what clothing to wear, and all that, right? So it's basically training to become like a paramour, or I can't remember the name of the word they use in the film, but it's very lighthearted, and there's dancing and music and that kind of thing in it, and they don't take it very seriously. But if you if you think about that film a bit and you take a step back and look at they're training a teenage girl to become basically a man's like prostitute. I don't know if she becomes his wife because, like I said, well, there's a main character that enjoys her but treats her like a child, an older man, a rich man, a very rich man, older man. I mean, not old as in his 50s, but old as in his 20s or whatever. And he's the talk of Paris. Uh, the bachelor, the most eligible bachelor in Paris and everything. Anyway, so a relationship starts to develop between him and Gigi. Anyway, so it's you know, in today's standards, it you get this feeling in the back of your neck that this is kind of creepy, right? If but when it came out, and when did it come out? 1962 or something? 58, 1958. Um, I guess it wasn't offensive to anybody. And overall, it is kind of like a bubbly, fun film, and Gigi is really positive. Got that that positive vibe that happy girls have when they're growing up. And But I don't know. Kind of nowadays, when you're looking back at it, it kind of seems a little bit creepy to me. But anyway, so um, it also has Casablanca, which is one of the great love stories of all time. If you have not watched that film, even if you don't like black and white films, you're gonna like that film. All right. And Gigi was very good. An American in Paris, that was an extremely good film as well. I really enjoyed watching that. The the cinematography on it, the coloring and everything was quite beautiful, and the story was interesting as well. And Gene Kelly was very magnetic in that film, and but mostly it was just the visuals of it was quite beautiful to watch. I was quite impressed with the visuals in it. It's a color film. It's not a black and white film. It came out in 1962? No, 1951. Wow, a decade earlier than I thought. So 1951, but it was in color. So. Um, So was Gigi, by the way, 1958. Casablanca was in black and white, and Miniver, which is the fourth film, Miss Miniver, this won Best Picture. That's why it's called a Best Picture winner. So each one of these won Best Picture. Um, it was directed by William Wyler, who's a director that I collect. So I wanted to see that, but I actually watched that. This was the first film because out of all four films, I seen Casablanca already, and I had seen an American in Paris when I was a little boy. Um, and I vaguely remember seeing Gigi, but I never seen that film. So I put that film on and I watched it for about 20 minutes and I fell asleep. So I don't know if it was boring or I was just tired because it wasn't at night or anything. I watched it during the day and I fell asleep to it. So I'll have to return to it. So I'm not exactly. It's supposed to be a really good film, like one of the first. You know, uh, I think it's the first war film ever to win an Oscar, right? It was basically about her living in rural England during World War II and how the family and everything is affected by the war. All right. And it was directed. So An American in Paris and Miss Minerva An American in Paris and Gigi were both directed by Vicente Minnelli, Liza Minnelli's father. And I collect him as well and Michael Curtis did Casablanca, which is another director I collect. So all four of these films I collect, and I don't think I have Gigi, but I think I have the other three in individual DVDs or Blu-rays. I'll have to check it out. But basically, this is fun to watch. And um, Turner Classic Movies does really good does a really good job in impressing their films on the DVD, they're quite clear. They're not blurred at all, even the older films. So I think they've cleaned them up before they put them on DVD, right? So, anyways, this set, all right, which this one says Best Picture on it. These set of DVDs where you get four films in a case from Turner Classic Movies are really good, and I collect them. So I think this is maybe the sixth or the seventh one that I found so far. All right, so that's the Best Picture winners from Turner Classic uh, Movies. Next up is a 2016 film directed by Oliver Stone, who I collect as a director, but I didn't have this film, and it's called Snowden. And it stars Joseph Gordon-Levitt. All right, remember him from? I always remember him as a kid from Third Rock from the Sun. And then he grew up and he did Brick. You ever see that film, Brick? Really good film, like kind of like a neo noir film. But this film is about Snowden. The whistleblower or whatever, the guy that sent a whole bunch of secret documents, government documents, CIA documents to WikiLeaks and to the newspapers because he thought that the American government and its spy agencies were overstepping their bounds when it came to American and international freedoms, right? So he became a whistleblower and he ended up in Russia. In the movie, that's the last I heard about where he was. He was in Russia. So it's basically, a fictional account of Snowden and his ideas ideas of why he did what he did and so on and so forth. So it's quite a good film. It's quite an interesting film. I watched it from beginning to end. Some of these type of films are kind of boring, but this one was not boring. Oliver Stone did a very good job at this film. All right, so that's Snowden from 2016. Next up is I found this 2012 film directed by Simon West, and it's the second in the film franchise of The Expendables. The Stallone-driven group of films that celebrates like 1980s and 1990s those action films, and basically in the, there's a fourth one coming out I think next year, The Expendables 4, but right now there's three of them. There's a trilogy. I found this Steelbook Blu-ray for $5. Can't go wrong with that, right? It's a very nice Steelbook. All right, so I found it for $5. Anyway, so the films themselves, they're basically a vehicle um, for guys like me, older guys who went through the 80s and 90s and all the, like the Bruce Willises, the Arnold Schwarzeneggers, Dolph Lundgren in those B movies after he was in what was it, Rocky Four? I think it was Rocky Four, right? And Jet Li, um, who else? Chuck Norris, the 70s and 80s films of Chuck Norris. So he's in there. Everybody that you can think of that was in action movies in the 80s and 90s, and then some more recent guys like what's the MMA fighter? What's that great MMA fighter? Man, I watched so many of his fights. Um, Randy Couture was in it, and others. So it actually says on the back: Stallone, Jason Statham, Jet Li, Dolph Lundgren, Chuck Norris, Tim Cruise, Randy Couture, Liam Hemsworth, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Bruce Willis, and Arnold Schwarzenegger are in this one. So basically, it's like a love film, a love action film to all the action stars of the 80s and 90s, right? So they're fun to watch, even if I don't even know what the storyline of half of them are. I just watch and go, cool. There's another one. Oh, cool. There's another guy, and then I kind of was fun about that, right? But it's usually some sort of action, like covert action of some sort of war of some sort, right? So yeah, this one is called Back for War. So it's a nice steel book. All right. Found it for $5. That's The Expendables 2. All right. Next up is a 1972 film by Michael Winner, um, who did a lot of Charles Bronson films, and this one is called The Mechanic, and there was a remake of this one starring Jason Statham, which I think is actually better than this one, to tell you the truth, because I watched this when I was quite young, in my early teens, And I thought it was a really cool film, but watching it now, I wasn't quite all that impressed with it. It's basically Charles Bronson, plays a hitman, and Jan Michael Vincent ends up being his protege, and it goes from there, right? So um, it's not a bad film by any sorts, but my favorite film, the Death Wish films, which is also one, two, and three were directed by Michael Winner, who directed this film as well. Um, and they starred Charles Bronson. Like the first Death Wish and Telephone is the other one I mentioned in a previous video. Probably my favorite uh, Charles Bronson film is you know um, Once Upon a Time in the West and Telephone, right? So this one isn't bad though, and if it's good enough for a remake, but I actually enjoy the Jason Statham remake better than I did this one. Now that I've watched this recently, right? So that's The Mechanic. Next up is the third installment of the Glass trilogy from M. Night Shyamalan. How do you say his last name? Shyamalan. Shyamalan. Um, it's difficult to say, but I do have it. Ignorant intellectual, right? But it's called Glass. I've not found this on Blu-ray yet, um, but when I saw it for like $2 um, on DVD, it has a nice slipcase to it as well. I said, yeah, I'm going to pick that up because I haven't seen the third one. So the first one was Unbreakable. It's probably the best of the three. And then this one is probably the second best of the three. And the third best of the three is what was that one called? This one's called Glass. The first one was called uh, Unbreakable. What was the third? I wrote it down. My brain always, or did I? Split. All right. So Unbreakable came out in 2000. Split came out in 2016. So it looks like Unbreakable was a single film, and then M Night Shyamalan decided, hey, let's make more films because that was one of his best loved movies, right? Basically, it starred Bruce Willis as as a guy that ends up realizing that it's very hard to kill him, and he has strength. He's basically a man who's also like quote unquote like a superhero. And Samuel L. Jackson plays Mr. Glass. I can't remember exactly his name in the film, but he has brittle bone syndrome, and he breaks his. He's in a wheelchair, and he breaks his bones quite easily, and so he ends up. Anyways, it's quite an interesting dynamic between those two characters, and then Split, which is basically a guy who has like a bunch of personalities, um, and he thinks he's some sort of guardian angel or superhero as well, and it all culminates in this film, Glass. It's quite an interesting trilogy. Watch the first one. Watch Unbreakable. If you haven't seen these films, watch Unbreakable first. If you enjoyed it, then watch Split and then watch Glass. Some people didn't really like uh, Unbreakable because it was kind of morose, like slow pace, slow moving. Um, the action scenes weren't like blow up action scenes; they were more subtle type of action scenes. And anyways, it's so it was kind of a slow paced action film, I guess you could say. It was like if you remember back in the day, after watching Star Wars, you were blown away, and then Indiana Jones, um, those characters for Harrison Ford, and all action, all fun, all jumping, and then you end up watching Blade Runner and go, whoa. I thought this was going to be like a super great action film like Star Wars or whatever, and it ends up being like more of a morose type of film. Um, that's the kind of feeling you get from Unbreakable. You think it's a superhero film, but then when you watch it, it's slow paced, and it's more a lot of it's kind of cerebral as well. Um, but this one is quite an enjoyable film. Everything all culminates together, right? All right. So next up is Our Man Flint, which came out in 1966, directed by Daniel Mann. And it's basically kind of like a James Bond film. He plays an American kind of James Bond, and he has these gadgets and this lighter that he uses in all these different ways, and He goes about, he has to go find three scientists who are blackmailing the world, um, because they have a way to control weather. All right, and he goes and takes care of that problem as the super uh, the super spy, Iron Man Flint can do. Right, so um, it's okay. It's an okay film. I wasn't blown away by it or anything, but I'm not sure if I'd watch it again. There is a sequel to this film, so maybe I'll pick up the sequel, see how that one is as well. But this is not a bad film. I mean, if you like the James Bond films, you'll probably like this film, right? So, Our Man Flint. All right. Uh, and next up is, now this film is an extremely good film. All right. This is 1962. Blake Edwards directed this film, and it's not a comedy starring what's his name from the Pink Panther, ignorant intellectual, Peter Sellers. It stars Jack Lemmon and Lee Remick, and it's basically one hell of a depressing film with a bit of light at the end of the film, right? And it's called the Days of Wine and Roses. All right, and this, like I said, 1962. All right, it's a black and white film. It's basically about Jack Lemmon plays a character who's like a what would you call it? A marketing guy. He basically makes companies look good in the media and to people individually when maybe they're not doing so good. That kind of guy. But basically, what he does is basically set up executives with hookers and shit like that in this film, right? And he ends up, because of his job, and he's not an immoral kind of guy, but he's doing an immoral kind of job. It eats at him, and he starts drinking, and he ends up spiraling down into alcoholism. And he brings his wife along with him, who's Lee Remick, all right, and they both end up. He ends up losing his job. He ends up getting put in a sanitarium. She ends up, you know, going out to bars and picking up strange men and doing all that kind of damaging things that you do when you have an addiction to alcohol. Basically, that's what that film is. A pretty happy life at the beginning, even though you see the drinking or whatever, and then you see the spiral down, uh, lives going right. So um, it's not as unpleasant as, let's say, Requiem for a Dream, which is not alcohol, it's more drugs. That is a pretty brutal film. If you have not seen that film, you want an anti-drug film, watch that film. I would suggest you let your kids watch that film, but its message is quite clear. And Ellen Bernstein in that film with the pills, the losing weight pills, um, it's a pretty brutal film. And this is kind of a similar idea about a husband and wife that, and they end up having a daughter as well, and or their lives spiral out of control because of alcoholism. Right? So it's not a really happy, although I'm not going to ruin the film for you, but at the end, there is a bit of light at the end of the film, right? But it's called Days of Wine and Roses. It's one of Blake Edwards' best films. All right, so 1962. All right, so next up, I found this, which is a quadruple feature. Um, of the Crow films, all the four Crow films on DVD. So I said, cool. Now, I tried to watch City of Angels, and it just killed me. And then after that, I just didn't even try these two films. All right. So, but this first film by Alex Proyas, starring Brandon Lee, is a very good film. It's not like one of the greatest action films of all time, but it's dark, it's morose, it's vengeful. All right, and Brandon Lee does a good job in this film. And it's basically about him and his wife, who are, you know, I think it's in Hell's Kitchen. I think they're in Hell's Kitchen, but don't quote me on that. Was it in Boston, in Hell's Kitchen? Anyway, so and these criminals end up killing him and his wife, um, and he comes back as a as an avenging kind of angel, to kill this organization that ended up raping and killing his wife and killing him, throwing him out the window of their apartment. Uh, and anyway, so um, yeah, it's a really dark film, but it's really, really stylistic. It's a really, really good stylistic film. And what's his name from the Warriors was in it, which is kind of funny. He plays another criminal. You know, the guy that with the bottles at the end of the Warriors. I don't know if you've seen the Warriors. Have you seen that gang film? Where he goes, clicks the bottles together, and goes, "Warriors come out to play," and then he gets louder. Well, he's in this film. He plays one of the main bad guys in this film. And he's a he's a really good bad guy in both films. He's a really good bad guy. Anyway, so I only watched the first film. The second film I tried to get through, I couldn't, so I stopped, and then I just didn't bother with the other four films. But you know, if you can get The Crow, like I wouldn't actually try to find these films individually. But since I had them on one disc, it's only going to take up one space on my shelf anyways, and it's four films. I said, hey, why not? All right, so that's the Crow series. All right. Next up after that is a Kino Lorber, not a Blu-ray, but a DVD. All right, one of their studio classics, and it's Convoy, starring Kristofferson. And this is a pretty cool film. I mean, it I like the nostalgia purposes. I saw it when I was a kid with my mom's boyfriend at the time, um, and it was during the time with the CB radios and the truckers, and they all had like cool handles, and you know they had all this lingo, like a police officer would be called a Smokey from Smokey the Bear or whatever, you know that kind, and all that lingo. So they kind of put that together, and it was directed by Sam Peckinpah. All right, and when did it come out? I think it was '78. It came out in 1978. Directed by Sam Peckinpah. It's not one of Peckinpah's greatest films, but it is a good film. And Kristofferson does a good job in this film. And yeah, overall, you have Ernest Borgnine as the main cop in this film as well. Um, it's kind of like a more serious Smokey and the Bandit if you watch Smokey and the Bandit, right? But overall, it's not a bad film. And Kino Lorber put it out. I wonder if they put this out on Blu-ray. But I found this for a couple of bucks, like $2. So a Kino Lorber for a couple of bucks, even on DVD, it's a good price. All right, and the last DVD that I found, I seen this in the theater a few years back. It came out in 2017, and I quite enjoyed it. You know, the idea behind it, and then the presentation of the film. It's like um, interesting concept, and it's called Downsizing. It stars Matt Damon, and it's directed by who directed this? Alexander Payne. Alexander Payne directed this. Um, you know, the guy that did Sideways. And Sideways, if you haven't seen that film, it's but you know these couples going to wine country and doing wine tasting, and Paul Giamatti in that film is just incredible. All right, if you have not seen Sideways, watch that film. I think people look at it and go, oh, it doesn't seem interesting, don't watch it. But then when they watch it, they're blown away by it. So I would highly suggest you watch Sideways. And this film is very good as well. All right. And this film is basically Matt Damon and his wife. His wife? I think it's his wife, not his girlfriend. Decide there's these Norwegian or Swedish scientists uh, discover a way to shrink people down to like this tall or whatever, right? And with what human beings are doing in a uh, global warming, you call it global warming or climate change. This was a way to like help solve that problem. Um, you just go to these scientists and downsize yourself, basically make yourself small, like maybe 4 or 5 inches tall or whatever. Um, like 5 inches tall. If you notice the tape here, right? There, I mean. And what you do is there's these communities that you go live at, and basically, because you're so small, everything that used to cost you a lot of money costs you very little. And so, with $10,000, it's like you're a millionaire or whatever, right? So you live a really good life. Um, you just have to get used to being small and living in a small community with a whole bunch of other small people, right? Anyways, they pull it off. The film, they pull it off quite well, right? And John, Matt Damon is really good in it, and there's some memorable characters in this film as well. It's very character driven, this film, and I quite enjoyed it, so much so that I ended up you know, picking it up because of, I really enjoyed Sideways, and I said, "Oh, this is Alexander Payne," and I went to see it in the theater, and then I said, "Oh, I found it on DVD. I'll pick it up and add it to my collection." So those are the films, and now last of all the three CDs. All right, so basically, I found the third album by the Black Rebel Motorcycle Club. I did a video just previously of my CD library, and I was on Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, and I couldn't remember if I had the third one or not. I know I listened to the first one and the second one. Oh, here it is. It's called Howl, and it's by the Black Rebel Motorcycle Club. It came out in 2005, and it's their third CD, right? Um, their first two are very good. The first one, most consider their first as their best. The second one, it's kind of a bit of a mess, everybody says, but that's the one that introduced me to the Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, and I really enjoyed the second CD of theirs. The first one, I then went back and listened to the first one, and now I found this one for $2, which is their third one. So I have not listened to this one yet, but it seems most people quite enjoy it, and they call it their second best one. So it'd be the first one, which is their self-titled album, then this one, which is called Hal, and then their second one would be the third best, which would be called Take Them on Your Own. Take Them on Your Own. Yeah. All right. So I have not listened to this, but what do you think of Black Rebel Motorcycle Club? Their first two albums I quite enjoyed actually, so I'll probably enjoy this one. All right. And next up is um, two CDs by one of the great soul artists of all time, and that's Marvin Gaye. We got Here My Dear, which came out in 1978 and is his 15th album. And then you have the one that came out after that, In Our Lifetime, which is his 16th album. This one came out in 78. This one came out in 1981. And this one basically, he was married to, what was her name? I wrote it down so I remember. Um, Anna Gordy, Anna Gordy Gay, um, his first wife, and they were going through a divorce at this time. And basically, this is, his pain of this divorce um, in music. All right, so it's quite an interesting. Many critics panned it, saying that it wasn't all that great of an album, but I quite enjoy it. I probably think this one. Well, there's three albums that basically, if you're gonna just do Marvin Gaye quickly, there's three. There's Hear My Dear, all right, which is probably his third best out of the three. Then there's Let's Get It On, which is probably his second best out of the three. And then his greatest album of all time is What's Going On. That kind of protest song about it's questioning his brothers and what's going on at the time in America, right? So What's Going On, Let's Get It On, which is more sexual one that most people will play when they want to be in a romantic mood. Maybe they're on a date and they're cooking dinner for their significant other or whatever you want to get in a romantic mood, you put on, Let's Get It On by Marvin Gaye or, some other, uh, soul records or whatever, right? So, but this one is, I think, is third best, all right? And then this one came out afterwards, In Our Lifetime. I have not listened to this one, all right? But he ended up signing to Columbia and does two albums. I think it was for Columbia. I'll leave it here, but I think it's Columbia because this is his last one for Motown. This one's a Motown one as well. He was with Motown for pretty much all of his career, um, and then he left Motown and he joined Columbia. And he put out, I think, two albums, and then his father killed him. Right, there was some sort of domestic dispute between his father and and his mother, and his father was attacking his mother, and he intervened in it, and then his father put two bullets in him, one in the chest and one in the shoulder, basically almost killing him instantly, right? And that was the end of Marvin Gaye, right? So he was like maybe he was in his 40s at the time, maybe 44, 45, something like that. And it was quite a sad day, especially if you enjoyed Marvin Gaye. And it was like, bam, and one day he's alive, the next day he's dead. And I'm not a big person on getting into people's personal lives, whether they're stars or actors or whatever. Live your life. I'll live my life. If I really enjoy your art, I'll be impressed by your art. You as a person, I don't know you, so I don't really judge you, right? So, um, but the day that Marvin Gaye was shot, and then you find out that he's dead, and you know he's not going to be putting out any more music, it was quite a sad day for me. I really enjoyed his music, right? But like I said, first is what's going on. Second is let's get it on, and the third one is this one. Now, this one came after this one, so I'm assuming it's going to be pretty good as well, right? Um, it's called In Our Lifetime. Yeah, the final Motown sessions. All right, so we'll see how I enjoy that one when I listen to it. And those are two Marvin Gaye CDs, and that's everything that I collected. I hope you enjoyed this video. There'll be more of this type as I go around to the thrift stores. So anyway, so that's for this edition of Thrift Store Haul. All right, and there'll be another one in the future. And I hope you enjoyed it. And if you like the film, leave a film. I always call it a film instead of a video. If you like the video, leave a thumbs up. Think about subscribing if you want. I would quite enjoy that. And I will see you in my next video. And you have a good day. And bye for now.